Today's daf, we're going to be learning Yoma. This is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to start at the very bottom of the daf. And if you recall, we were in the middle of a bunch of questions of Rav Papa that he asked. Some of them we'll see we have answers to. Yesterday's all ended in Teku. Today also many will end in Teku. We were discussing the Mishnah of the chofen, when the Kohen takes a chofen of Ktoret, takes a handful of incense, and then he's going to bring that into the Kodesh Kodashim. But we're also going to have some questions that relate to a similar process, which is the kmitza of the mincha. When you take the three fingers of the Kohen, he takes them into the mincha, the meal dough, takes them out, and then he puts the process there. It's actually very parallel. There's the rabbis always make a parallel between the actions of kmitza of a mincha offering to the slaughtering of an animal. That the kmitza is like the shchita, putting it in the utensil, in a kli sharet. It has to be placed in the kli sharet. You put it in this utensil. That's like Kabbalah, like accepting the blood, which also happens in a sanctified utensil. And then the holacha, there's holacha also of the mincha offering to the altar. And then there's the haktara, the burning of it, which is parallel to the sprinkling of the blood on the altar. So now they ask the following question. It has to go, the second stage is to put it inside the kli sharet. What if it gets stuck on the side of the kli? What if it doesn't go into the bottom of the kli, but it gets stuck on the side? Do we say toch kli b'yinan? It needs to go into the utensil, and then we say v'ha'ika, and this is inside the kli, right? Does it have to just be in the airspace, or odilma hanacha b'tocho ketikno b'yinan, or does it have to actually go in properly? And that's not going in properly, right? Imagine somebody serves you a bowl with some food in it and the food is stuck on the side of the bowl. That's very strange. Maybe it's not actually the right way to do it, right? It needs kitikno b'yinan b'haleka. This isn't normal way of putting it in a bowl. Teku. So the answer is we don't really know the answer. To which we have another question now from Farber of Ashi. So we're going off to the side, off of Rav Papa. We had, again, last class, we had 3 questions. This was question number 4 of Rav Papa. Now we're going to have a question of Farber of Ashi. Very similar to the previous one. What if you flip the utensil upside down? Now imagine a goblet, right? A classic Kiddush cup, the more old-fashioned type. Nowadays, they have all modern styles that don't really have that. But often at the bottom, there's a little base. And if you flip it upside down, that bottom can actually be a utensil and it can hold something in there. So he asks, what if you flip it upside down and then you put the kmitza, part that he takes out with his fingers, you put that dough in the bottom of the base. It's almost like it's its own bowl. Do we say, Mahu? It needs to be inside the kli, and this is actually inside the kli. Or do we say, do we say there has to be in its normal manner? And this is not done in its normal manner. And the answer again is Teku, we don't know the answer. Okay, moving to question number 5 of Rav Papa. By Rav Papa. Now we're back to the chofen. When we say the Kohen has to take a handful, right, using his hands, michukot o gedushot. Do we mean flat? Like, when you go and measure, right? There's always, when you measure a cup of flour for a cake recipe, you're always going to make sure you flatten out the top, and it's, right, if you're careful about this kind of thing. So you flatten it. That's mechukot. Ogedushot, or does it mean overflowing, like a heaping? Right? Sometimes a recipe calls for a heaping tablespoon or a heaping teaspoon. So which kind? Let's learn it from here. Neither that nor that. Ela tfufot. Tfufot is in between. It's not exactly heaping. It's not exactly flat. It's a little bit more, but not too much more. Now we're going to quote a Mishnah. Now we're back to sacrifices. You're going to see that we're going to compare the processes. Okay, now, like I said, there's shchita, slaughtering, then Kabbalah, accepting the blood. What if when you go to accept the blood, instead of it going into the kli sharet, what happens? It immediately spills on the floor. And then you collected the blood. Okay, it's not the easiest thing to do, but let's say somehow you managed to collect it. Pasul, it's disqualified. Okay, now they say, min hakli al haritzpa v'asafo. If you put it on a utensil and then you collect it, then we say, kasher. meaning you put it in the kli sharet, and then it fell on the floor after that. Now, since it was already in the kli sharet to begin with, then we say it's okay because it went straight into the kli sharet and then spilled on the floor. Then it can be collected. The issue is, we're going to learn it right now. Ditanu Rabbanan, Emile, where do we get this from? Ditanu Rabbanan, it says in the following braita, v'lakach midam hapal. It says you take from the dam hapar. This is on Yom Kippur. Midam hanefesh, v'lo midam ha'ol, v'lo midam hatamtzi. Has to be the blood that comes out when you slaughter it. That big spurt of blood that comes out, not the dama or, not just comes out from nicking the skin, and not from damatamsi, which is after the main spurt of blood comes out, you can squeeze some more blood out. That's not the blood we're talking about. Where do we learn this from? Midama pav. How do we know this? Sorry. Vilakach midama pav. That means, right, which dama pav? The dama nefesh, not the dama tamsi, not the dama or. Midam hapal, but now they darshan specifically, what does it mean, midam hapal? Dam mehapal yekablen. They switch around the words a little bit. Instead of reading it as midam hapal, they say midam, they say dam mehapal. They move the mem from the word midam to the next word. So now they say, that teaches us it has to come directly from the par into the vessel. You have to get it straight from there, not that it fell on the floor first. Once it goes into the kli sharet, then it's already collected. After that, you can recollect it. That's fine because it went straight into there. Now they're going to explain how they got to this drasha, dam me hapal instead of mi dam hapal, right? How do you move this letter over to the other word? De isal kadatach mi dam hapal, mi dam va'afilu mikzatam. If you want to say midam hapal, normally whenever we have the word mi, we've seen this before, from, it means some and not all of it. That would be the simple reading of midam hapal. It means take some of the blood from the bull. To which they say, you have to get all the blood from the bull. You can't just take some of it. That doesn't work. How do we know this? It says, and all the blood of the bull has to be poured at the base of the altar. So therefore, it can't be, this is actually, I realized I made a mistake. This is not from Yom Kippur. This is all in Vayikra Perek Dalet. Okay, we're not talking about the par of Yom Kippur. We're talking about a different bull offering. But the point being here that when you take, right, the midam hapal means, it can't mean some of the blood when you go to slaughter an animal, some gets sprinkled on the altar. No, you have to take all the blood that's called the dama nefesh. In which case, mi dam hapal can't be understood the simple reading. And that's why they say, Elash mamina, my mi dam hapal has to be darshan some other way. Dam me hapal yekablenu, which again means directly, it has to go straight into there. V'kasavar, and they obviously hold, gol'in umosifim v'dorshin. This is the methodology they use to darshan, which is gol'im, we take it away. We took the mem away from this word. Mosifim, we add it to the other next word, and then we darshan it. That's what we do. So therefore, that was kind of introduction to this next section. By Rav Papa. Rav Papa wants to know now, what's the story with the Ktoret? Is it the same way? Nitpazra ha-Ktoret mimalo chofnav mahu. What if the Ktoret, okay, before we even get to the Ktoret on Yom Kippur, let's just talk about the regular Ktoret. So we already compared the Shechita in a regular sacrifice, Kabbalah, right? And that's what we're talking about here. It has to be accepted right away. If we say the same thing for Kmitza, right? We have the Kmitza, the Kohen sticks his fingers in with his 3 fingers. Then he puts it in a Kli Sharet. Okay, now that's all in this. What if, let's now go to the Ktoret by the Kohen Gadol. We don't have Kmitza here on Yom Kippur. We have Meloch Chofnav, puts it in his hands. And then what does he do after that? He puts it into this utensil. Now, you might say very simply, the same way we say about Kmitza, gathering it in his hands is like the Shechita, is like the Kmitza of a Mincha offering. Putting it in the Kli Sharet is the next process of Kabbalah, in which case, if it spills before that, you can't gather it up off the floor. However, there's one big difference, and that came up in yesterday's daf, which is the reason why we put it in the Kli Sharet is not to sanctify it. The reason why we do it is because, why? Because he can't carry it in both his hands because he also has to bring in the coals in addition to bringing in this spoonful of Ktoret. or kli full of ketoret. So therefore, it's not parallel to those other cases. So that's why Rav Papa asked the following question. Lost the spot. By Rav Papa. Okay, we're up to question number 6 here. What if the ketoret scattered after he had it in his hands? Do we say yado kitzavar behema dami upsula? It's just like the shchita, the blood that came out of the animal's body and went straight on the floor. His hands are no different. It's not a sanctified vessel at all. Oh, Dilma, so then what's the other option, right? So again, if it falls on the floor, too bad, it's already disqualified. Oh, Dilma, velo psula. This is a fascinating havamina. This havamina means, right, hypothesis. What are they, or suggestion? They're suggesting that maybe his hands are like a kli sharet. Why do they think that? Because we already just said that you don't need to put it in the vessel because it needs to be sanctified. It's already sanctified once he puts it in his hands. In which case, his hands, is a very interesting thought, that his hands function like a vessel here. When he, right, it's not like the knitza when he sticks his fingers in. That's not the same. The Maloch Hofnav and Yom Kippur, it's almost like, again, this concept of Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippur is different than any other day. And somehow his hands are like a sanctified vessel, which is a fascinating concept. Again, it requires more thinking about it. But the idea being here that maybe his hands are like a vessel. So once it falls from his hands, well, it already got collected properly, and then he could gather it up again and bring it into the Kodesh Kodeshim. To which the Gemara answers, Teku, we're not sure. Okay, question number 7. By Rav Papa, Chishev b'chafinat haktoret mahu. What if you have what we call a pigul machshava? You think while you're doing the chafinat haktoret, that you're going to sprinkle the, right, while you're, actually, this is, right, when you're gathering the ketoret together, you think, I'm going to burn it in the Kodesh Kodeshim tomorrow instead of today. Okay, you have the wrong machshava. Mi amrina, now, what is this action? Is it like a sacrifice? With knitza, we say it's parallel to a sacrifice. But is this parallel to a sacrifice? It's not the same as our regular meal offering. This is incense. This is different. So, chishev b'chafinat haktoret ma'u. Mi amrina yalef melo mi mincha. Do we learn it from a mincha offering? Just like a mincha offering, it says, I'm reading from Vayikra Bet, Pasuk Bet. V'hevi'al b'nei Aaron ha'kohanim b'kamatz misham melo kumtzo. He takes a full kometz. And it says here, v'lakach melo hamachta in Yom Kippur. So the melo appears in both. So therefore, just like mahata mahanya b'machshava, machshava can mess up the mincha offering. Likewise, it can disqualify the incense, and then the incense can't be used again. So hachanami mahanya b'machshav. Oh no, or do you say no? It doesn't. It's not the same thing. This isn't an avodah. A mincha is a sacrifice we're going to burn on the altar. So is sacrifices. Those have pigul. This is something different. It's true we burn it on the golden altar, but it's different. It's not the same type of thing. It's not an offering that's going to burn, right? It smokes up. It's something else. Not exactly an avodah. So Rav Shimi bar Ashi Rav Papa. Here we're going to get an answer, right? Until now we've had all tekus. I think all of them were tekus, right? So now we're going to finally have an answer. Tashma, let's learn from here. Hosif Rabbi Akiva. It should say, right? I have to remember now. Let's look on the side. It should say, the hay tells us, right, hasolet. The solet, which is the fine flour in a mincha offering. The ktoret, the incense, which is what we're discussing. The livona, the frankincense that goes with the lechem apanim, the showbread. The hagchalim, and the coals that are used to burn all these things in the inner altar. If you have a pile of them. Now, if you have a dough, so a dough is all one thing. So you touch part of it, you touch the other part. But if you have incense or flour or, right, any of these things, the frankincense or the coals, you have a pile of them. Each within the pile, you have separate parts, right? Separate coals, separate granules of flour, separate, right? Everything's separate. But the fact is, since these are significant items, and they have what we call kedushat haguf, this is what we're going to mean. A tful yom can be metame something, okay? Im nagat tful yom b'miktzatam pasalet kulan. This is what we call chibur. These are viewed as one whole item. That means if a tful yom who still has a certain level of tuma about him, if he touches part of it, he messes up all of it, even though it's not one item. It's viewed all as one item. And this is because, okay, we're going to see Rashi says, Al makitsha kli kedushat haguf. Okay, I'm in Rashi Dibur Matchel Kasak. We didn't read this yet. One second. I'll read that Rashi in a minute. Right, Rashi says in the previous Rashi, posel et kulam. Why is the whole thing messed up? Shezoi achat me'asara ma'alot shene'emru b'chomer b'kodesh. Shakli metzaref et mashu b'tocho liot ki'ilu naga b'kulo. Because they're all in a vessel, they're viewed as one whole item. Okay, now, im nagat tful yom b'miksatam pasal et kulan. So if he touches that, kasal kadate midapasal tful yom pasla nami lina. Now they're going to say a tful yom doesn't passel everything. He can only passel things. He disqualifies things that have kedushat haguf to them, where they themselves are sanctified. The body of them is sanctified. Now, once something is kedushat haguf is opposed to having kedushat amim, that just its value is sanctified. We've seen the distinction in the past. So now, since the tful yom can disqualify it, that means it's kedushat haguf, which means therefore that it's passeled by lina. That means if you leave it overnight, anything that has kedushat haguf that's left overnight becomes disqualified, meaning you didn't use it that day. But what does this have to do with anything? Well, midilina pasla nami machshava. If leaving it overnight disqualifies it, then it's obviously considered some form of avodah, of ritual, in which case, pasla nami machshava. In which case, it's going to have the laws of pigul. We're going to basically view this, since it can be disqualified by leaving overnight, therefore, we view this as if it's some sort of ritual like a korban. It's got similar properties to a sacrifice, in which case we're going to assume the pigul applies as well. So we actually have an answer to this question. Okay, moving on to question number 8. By Rav Papa, when they rake the coals to get them into the shovel, right? He rakes them with the shovel. And he has an intent that he's going to burn the incense in the wrong time, right? Tomorrow, let's say. Mahu. What do we say about that? So before we talked about when you do the chafina, which is part of the avodah, the ritual. But this is getting it ready for the ritual. This is what we call machshirei mitzvah. Getting it, preparing it for the mitzvah. Machshirei mitzvah ki mitzvah dame. Oh no. Is it similar to a mitzvah or is it not? Do the laws of pigul apply to that also? Teku. We don't know. Okay, we finished now with Rav Papa's questions. We're moving on to a question of, they asked Rav Sheshet. Rav Sheshet. They asked the following question of Rav Sheshet. Holacha b'smol mahu. One of the actions we talked about is carrying the blood to the altar. Now, it's the only one that's not actually mentioned explicitly in the Torah, and they derive it from one of the sections. It says ikrivu. That means walking it. We'll get to all that in Zvachim, I assume. But now, holacha b'smol mahu. Are you allowed to do now all the other avodot? You can look at Rashi. Rashi says in Dibor Matchil holacha b'smol mahu. Holachat adam mibayale. Why do they only ask about holacha? Because Kabbalah is rika, it's dichtiv behu kihuna pshitalan. Because kol makom shenemar etzba u kihuna eno el yamin. There's a particular rule. If it says etzba or it says kihuna kohen, or maybe both, there's a whole debate about that in another sugya. You need yad yamin. So they all say etzba, and it has to be with the finger, and kihuna it says okay. Aval holacha lo chtiv behedya, but by holacha, not only is it not mentioned in the Torah, but mida'af kerachmana lekabbalah b'lashon holacha, d'tanya v'ikrivu zo kabbalat adam. They learn from v'ikrivu, that's kabbalat adam, but they actually say then that includes holacha. Nafkava b'mesechah chagiga she avodah. So they learn out that it's avodah, but it doesn't say there kehuna. It doesn't say you need a kohen to do it or etzba. So therefore, maybe you could do it with the left hand. Amaluhu Rav Sheshet Tanitua. Let's learn it from here. Rav Sheshet answers them. It says, Natala tamachta b'yamino ve'etakaf b'smolo. Right? Remember it says that? What does the Kohen do? He takes the shovel in his right hand and the spoon, or this little, right, where he has all the incense in his left hand. And what do you see here? He uses his left hand. So then they say, it must be, it's okay. So now they say, no way. Why don't we learn it from Haregel shel yamin b'smol ubeit orav alachutz? So they say, wait, but why would you learn it from there? We can learn it from a previous Mishnah that we saw, if you remember, when we talked about all the Kohanim on the daily basis who carry the parts of the Korban Tamid. So he takes in one hand the regel of yamin, he takes Remember, the rush and the regel are the first things that are carried and is carried by the first Kohen. So he takes the rush in his right hand because that's more important. And he takes the regel yamin, the right leg, in his left hand. And he has to make sure, if you remember, Beito Rabba Lachut, he puts the skin side out so it doesn't, you don't want to see the cut of the animal. Anyway, the point is here also he carries something bismol. So why don't you learn it from here? So now think about what's happening. The first case they learn it from is the kaf that they're bringing into the Kodesh Kodeshim to burn the incense. And that's in his left hand. The regel of yamin is carrying to the altar in order to burn it on the altar. So they say, you might have thought this is a holacha that doesn't prevent kapara atonement, because the atonement is already done before you bring them onto the altar. It's the sprinkling of the blood that provides atonement. Aval holacha de ma'achva kapara lo, but maybe holacha which could prevent atonement. In other words, the holacha that leads to the process of atonement, maybe not. So holacha of the sacrifice is to bring the blood to the altar to sprinkle the blood. That's the important part. So you might have thought, lo, therefore kamash malan. That's why we learned it specifically from the incense, which is also something that you achieve atonement through, and not from the limb of the animal carrying it up onto the altar, which is just the burning, which is not something that affects atonement. With that, we will end for today, and we'll start in next class with a question on that. And with that, I will wish everyone Shabbat Shalom or Shavua Tov.